The CIA counterintelligence officer sits across from his wife at their favorite Italian restaurant in Georgetown. It's 1985, and Rosario doesn't know that the man buttering his bread roll just sold 10 human beings to the Soviet Union. She reaches across the table, touches his hand, asks if everything's okay at work. He smiles, that easy, charming smile she fell in love with, and says, "Just the usual bureaucratic nonsense, honey." What she doesn't see, the $50,000 cash payment folded in his jacket pocket. What she doesn't know, her husband, Aldrich Ames, has just committed the most devastating betrayal in CIA history. And the worst part? He did it not for ideology, not for blackmail, not even for his country. He did it because he wanted to buy her things. He wanted her to love him. This is the story of a man who destroyed everything he touched, all while convincing himself he was just trying to be a good husband. Rick Ames was aggressively unremarkable. In the corridors of CIA headquarters in Langley, he was the guy you'd forget you met. Medium height, thinning hair, thick glasses that made him look like an accountant who'd wandered into the wrong building. His colleagues described him as adequate, possibly the most damning word in the intelligence community. But Rick didn't see himself that way. In his own mind, he was brilliant, underappreciated, destined for something greater than the Soviet desk job he'd been shuffling papers at for 15 years. His first marriage had collapsed in 1983. His ex-wife had grown tired of his drinking, his grandiosity, his bottomless need for validation. Rick moved into a basement apartment in Arlington, surrounded by boxes he never unpacked and bottles he emptied too quickly. He was 42 years old and felt like a failure. Then he met Rosario. She was a cultural affairs officer at the Colombian embassy. Sophisticated, beautiful, everything Rick wasn't. When she laughed at his jokes at embassy parties, something cracked open inside him. Here was someone who saw him as special. Someone who didn't know about his mediocre performance reviews or his drinking problem or the way other CIA officers rolled their eyes when he started talking. But Rosario had expensive tastes. She'd grown up in Bogota's upper class, accustomed to a lifestyle Rick's $60,000 government salary couldn't touch. She wanted nice restaurants, designer clothes, a house in the suburbs. Rick wanted desperately to give her those things, not because he was materialistic, but because he was terrified. Terrified she'd realize what everyone else already knew, that he was ordinary. In April 1985, Rick Ames made a decision. He would prove he wasn't ordinary. He would do something bold, something nobody else had the courage to do. He would sell secrets to the KGB. Rick tells himself a story as he walks into the Soviet embassy on April 16, 1985. It's a story he'll repeat in his head for the next 9 years, polishing it until it shines like truth. The story goes like this. He's not really betraying anyone. He's going to give the Soviets fake intelligence, get some quick cash to pay off his debts, and walk away. The KGB handlers will think they've recruited him, but Rick, clever Rick, will be in control the whole time. It's a victimless crime, a con job, almost admirable in its audacity. This is the story. Here's what actually happens. The Soviet diplomat who meets him in a quiet room understands immediately what Rick doesn't. This isn't a man running a con. This is a desperate man trying to convince himself he's not doing something monstrous. The diplomat listens patiently as Rick explains he needs $50,000. He has credit card debt. His girlfriend has expectations. Of course, the diplomat says, and in return, Rick hands over a package. Inside are the names of 2 Soviet intelligence officers who are secretly working for the CIA. Just 2 names, he tells himself. Just enough to prove his access is real. The Soviets will pay him, he'll get ahead of his debts, and then he'll stop. But the diplomat leans forward with another question. Who else? And Rick, maybe because he's had a few drinks to steady his nerves, maybe because he's already crossed a line and doesn't know how to step back, maybe because someone is finally treating him like he's important, keeps talking. By the time he walks out of that embassy, Rick Ames has given the KGB the names of 10 Soviet citizens secretly working for America, 10 human beings who trusted the CIA to protect them. The payment comes quickly. $50,000 in cash, handed over in a brown paper bag in a parking garage like something out of a movie. Rick holds the money in his hands and feels, for the first time in years, powerful. He takes Rosario to dinner that night at a restaurant so expensive he'd never dared go before. She orders champagne. He watches her smile in the candlelight and tells himself he's done the right thing. He's taking care of her. That's what matters. What he doesn't let himself think about, the 10 people whose names he sold are already being arrested by the KGB. Living 2 lives is easier than Rick expected. Maybe that should have worried him. He goes to work each morning at CIA headquarters, passes through security, sits at his desk analyzing Soviet intelligence. His job is literally to protect the exact operations he's destroying. The irony doesn't seem to bother him. His colleagues notice he's suddenly paying off debts, taking nicer vacations, but nobody asks too many questions. This is the 1980s CIA, a fraternity of alcoholics and eccentrics where don't ask, don't tell applies to more than sexuality. Rick's drinking, which was always problematic, gets worse. He shows up late. He misses meetings. Once he passes out at his desk. He receives a mediocre performance review. Nobody suspects treason. They just think he's a drunk. Meanwhile, Rosario is happy. They get married in 1985, buy a house in Arlington for $540,000 cash. Rick tells her he got an inheritance. She doesn't question it because why would she? Her husband works for the CIA. She assumes he's trustworthy. Every few months, Rick meets his KGB handler. They've developed a routine that feels almost mundane. Dead drops in parks. Chalk marks on mailboxes signaling meetings. Rick leaves documents in one location, returns later to find envelopes stuffed with cash. Sometimes $20,000, sometimes $50,000. Over 9 years, the total reaches $4.6 million. The money piles up faster than he can spend it. He buys a Jaguar. Then another one. He remodels the house, $99,000 for renovations paid in cash. Rosario, who now knows the money isn't from any inheritance, asks once where it all comes from. Investments, Rick says. I've been playing the market. She wants to believe him, so she does. But there are moments when the mask slips. Moments when Rick is alone in his car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, unable to remember if he's supposed to be Rick Ames, the CIA officer, or Rick Ames, the KGB spy. Moments when he hears about another Soviet officer gone missing and has to check his records to see if that was one of his. The guilt doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation. He starts drinking more, not socially, alone, methodically, until the thoughts stop. He gains weight. He stops sleeping well. Rosario asks if he wants to see a therapist, and Rick laughs it off. Just work stress, honey. But late at night, when Rosario is asleep and Rick is on his 3rd scotch, he sometimes thinks about the people he's betrayed. He knows intellectually that they're probably dead. The KGB doesn't keep traitors alive, but he's developed a talent for not thinking about things he doesn't want to think about. He tells himself, I never met these people. They're not real to me. I'm protecting my family. Except it's not true. He's seen their files. Some of them have children. Some of them risked everything because they believed in freedom or democracy or simply wanted out from under Soviet oppression, and Rick gave them up for a down payment on a house. By 1989, the Soviet sources the CIA relied on have almost all gone silent. Not just the ones Rick sold, but the operations have a way of collapsing like dominoes. The CIA knows there's a mole. They just don't know who. Rick volunteers to join the task force hunting for the mole. The irony is exquisite. The traitor investigating his own betrayal. During the meetings, Rick is helpful, thoughtful. He suggests looking at officers with gambling debts or sexual vulnerabilities. He's memorized the playbook because he wrote it. Every suggestion he makes sends the investigation in the wrong direction. At home, Rosario is pregnant with their son. Rick holds her hand in the delivery room and cries. Real tears, genuine emotion. For a moment, holding his newborn son, he thinks about confessing everything, starting over, being the father his child deserves. Instead, he makes another dead drop that afternoon. The investigation takes years because nobody wants to believe it could be one of their own. They look at lower-level officers, translators, secretaries. They investigate people with foreign-born spouses, which includes Rick, but also includes dozens of others. The breakthrough comes in 1991, not from brilliance, but from patience. A CIA analyst notices something. Rick's bank deposits don't match his salary, not by a little, by hundreds of thousands of dollars. When investigators pull his credit card records, the evidence is staggering. Cash advances, payments to luxury retailers, all while making $69,000 a year. The FBI begins surveillance in 1993. They watch Rick leave chalk marks on mailboxes. They follow him to dead drops. They document everything, building an airtight case. Rick, who spent years convincing himself he's smarter than everyone else, doesn't notice. Or maybe he does and simply doesn't care anymore. The drinking has gotten so bad that Rosario has threatened to leave. Rick promises to quit, doesn't, promises again. On February 21, 1994, FBI agents arrest Rick and Rosario outside their home. Rick doesn't resist. In fact, witnesses say he seems almost relieved. After 9 years of lying, the performance is finally over. Rosario is hysterical. She genuinely had no idea, or had convinced herself she had no idea, which amounts to the same thing. The FBI separates them immediately. Rick will never see his wife as a free man again. In interrogation, Rick confesses quickly, not because he's brave, but because he's exhausted. The FBI agent asks him why. Why did he do it? Rick's answer is chilling in its banality. The money. I needed the money. For what? For my wife, for my family. To feel like I was somebody. The agent presses harder. Does Rick understand that his betrayal led to deaths, that families were destroyed? Rick nods slowly. I try not to think about that, he says. I tried not to think about them as real people, but they were real. Rick looks away. Yes, they were real. At least 10 people died because of Rick Ames. The exact number is classified, but intelligence analysts believe that the true toll is higher. Soviet officers executed, Eastern European dissidents imprisoned, entire operations rolled up, leaving assets exposed and desperate. One of them was Dmitry Polyakov, a Soviet general who'd been passing intelligence to the CIA for nearly 2 decades. When Rick sold his name, Polyakov was recalled to Moscow, tried in secret, and executed. He had a wife, children. They never learned why he disappeared. Another was Sergei Motorin, a KGB officer who'd been feeding information to the CIA about Soviet espionage in Washington. Executed. Valery Martinov. Executed. The list goes on. These weren't statistics. They were human beings with lives and families and reasons for what they did. Rick Ames traded all of them for a Jaguar and a big house. Rosario divorced him. She served a 5-year sentence for tax evasion and conspiracy. She'd signed the tax returns, knew about the money, and couldn't claim complete ignorance. After her release, she disappeared from public life. Their son, who'd been 4 years old when his father was arrested, grew up knowing his father as the most notorious traitor in CIA history. Rick was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. He's now 83 years old, incarcerated in Pennsylvania. In prison interviews over the years, he's been oddly forthcoming, not remorseful exactly, but reflective. He talks about his betrayal with a kind of detached curiosity, as if analyzing someone else's choices. When asked about the people who died because of him, Rick says he compartmentalized. He had to, or he couldn't have functioned. He'd go to work, come home, kiss his wife, play with his son. The people he betrayed existed in a separate mental box labeled necessary sacrifice. Did you ever think about their families? An interviewer once asked. Rick was quiet for a long moment. Not while I was doing it. Now I think about them constantly. It's all I have time to do. The CIA's analysis of Rick's betrayal concluded he was motivated primarily by money and ego, 2 of the most mundane reasons in espionage. He wasn't an ideologue who believed in communism. He wasn't blackmailed. He wasn't a tortured soul torn between 2 loyalties. He was just a mediocre man who wanted to feel special and who sacrificed human lives to maintain that feeling. Picture that restaurant in Georgetown again. Rick and Rosario, 1985, sitting across from each other in the candlelight. He's just sold 10 people to the KGB, and she has no idea. He reaches across the table, takes her hand, and promises her the world. She believes him because she loves him, and he destroys her for it. That's the real betrayal at the heart of this story, not the espionage, but the intimate deception. Rick didn't just betray his country or the people who trusted the CIA to protect them. He betrayed the woman who loved him, the son who needed a father, the colleagues who covered for his drinking and incompetence. He betrayed everyone constantly for 9 years and told himself he was doing it for love. The question isn't whether Rick Ames is a monster. He is. The question is, how does an ordinary person become one? How do you go from being unremarkable to being responsible for deaths you can't undo? Rick's answer, one choice at a time, each one easier than the last, until you've traveled so far from who you were that you can't find your way back. The 10 people who died didn't get to make that journey. Rick made it for them. And Rosario, who just wanted a husband she could trust? She learned too late that the man she loved never really existed at all.